Live from the Mecca of Mormonism, Salt Lake City, Utah. This is Heart of the Matter, where we are relearning together how to live as Christians in the age of fulfillment. I'm your host, Shawn McCraney. We have talked about sex and marriage. We've talked about sex in general. We've talked about homosexual marriage. And the most logical step we should cover at this point in talking about living in the age of fulfillment is birth control. We've talked about marriage and everything. Well, now we're going to talk about what can Christian couples do or think about birth control. It's an important thing to understand in that the age of fulfillment that I propose every individual is responsible before God on how they live their lives as sons and daughters. Religionists have a hard time believing this, and they balk at the liberties I espouse, thinking that religion and its leaders must constantly emphasize the evils of fornication and birth control and homosexuality and abortion and the like. But in the age of fulfillment, where God writes his laws upon the hearts and minds of those who are his, and men and women choose to follow the Spirit of God in spirit and truth, these warnings and these exhortations really aren't necessary. A true son or daughter of God know how to follow the King and be responsible for their lives. We know when we're doing something off, and we know when we're doing something right. That's just part of having the Spirit in us. If someone chooses to live their life by the flesh in this age of fulfillment and reap accordingly, they can, and we're supposed to love each other along the way. But gone are the days of men and women standing over us and telling us what sins need to be avoided and what is bad and what is good, especially in the bedroom of married couples. Unfortunately, in the area of birth control, unauthorized organized religions of supposed authority have long asserted or inserted themselves, no pun intended, they've inserted themselves between the man and the wife and God, and they've said, no, we want to tell you what you must do in your marital relationship. And it's happened all along with the organized religions of the world. Usually the ideas of birth control include and usually start with, sometimes they'll talk about multiply and replenish the earth in Genesis, but usually they start with the story of a guy named Onan. Onan. And Onan had a brother whose name was They gave great first names back in that day. And died without having any children with his wife. And so Judah told Onan to go into Er's widow and make a baby. Marry her and make a baby. Make babies. Genesis 38, beginning at verse 8, puts it this way. And Judah said unto Onan, listen to how this is phrased, by the way, relative to our discussion about what marriage is. Go in unto thy brother's wife, that's Er's wife, and marry her. Go in unto her and marry her. That means have sexual relationships and marry her. He didn't say go in unto her and have a marriage in her tent, like a ceremony. Go in unto her and marry her and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that this seed should not be his. And it came to pass when he went in unto his brother's wife that he spilled it, that's how it says it, on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also, like he slew his brother The unfortunate interpretation of this story of Onan is that he was slain by God because he used the, what's the method called when you pull out? Withdrawal method. He withdrew and spilled the seed on the ground rather than depositing it inside Er's wife. And, really, that's such a bad interpretation of it because the Lord slew Onan because he was not participating in the Levirate marriage where it said, listen, if there's two brothers and the one has a wife, and the one brother dies without giving her issue, without giving her a child, the brother who survives her is supposed to make her his wife and go in and have sex with her so that they can have more children. Why would God do that among the nation of Israel? Because he wanted to raise up a large body of people among the Jews. They were a very small group, and he wanted them to grow in number and to accomplish the things he wanted them to do. So he instituted this Levirate marriage among them. Standing on the Onan story, though, religion has long stomped, using this passage, on seed spilling and therefore birth control in general. And it all started with the Catholics. I went to a Catholic website, and there's a summary there on birth control. And I'm going to read to you exactly what it says today. Genesis 38, 8 through 10. That's just what I read to you. Onan is killed by God for practicing contraception. That's what it says. In this case, the withdrawal method. And spilling his semen on the ground. That's how the Catholic Church is interpreting the story of Onan, that he was killed for that. Not for failing to practice Levirate marriage, but for the spilling of the seed on the ground. I want to know how many Christians in this world since Christ died have been with their spouse and spilled their seed. I mean, come on. When are we going to get real? I mean, seed spilling must be going on every night of the 365 with Christian couples. It has to be. Or we would have women pregnant constantly, right? The Catholic Church site goes on and says, all contraception, all contraceptive methods, all contraceptive devices cast the semen on the ground. Withdrawal obviously directly casts semen on the ground. This is the ultimate destination of all semen emitted elsewhere than in its proper place, the vagina. That's what it says. That's the proper place for the seed always to be, is in the vagina. I don't know how they handle nocturnal emission dreams that boys have. There's a lot of seed not going into vaginas with those. Nevertheless, they say that's the proper place for the seed. It goes on and says, I quote, condoms are discarded eventually on the ground, wasted. Semen emitted within a vagina during menstruation is deliberately wasted. Semen emitted within the vagina during purification is deliberately wasted. So what they're saying is the only time that semen should be released is inside the vagina, and every time inside the vagina, and that way you're going to have a lot of kids being born. So the Catholic Church is no contraception, and they use onanism to support that. Working backward from this man-made summary with the Catholic Church, we have dozens of the most ridiculous statements the Catholic Church has made about contraception. I mean, I'm not going to read them to you, but they go all the way back to Augustine. Just unbelievable statements about birth control. Let's talk reasonably here, okay? God told Adam and Eve to dress and keep the garden he gave them. And that requires responsibility. It requires forethought. It requires reason when you enter into caring for the earth. As human beings, we are given stewardship over things of the earth. If you have a farm, did you know that if you, and tobacco growers learn this in North Carolina and wherever they grow it, that if you plant repeatedly, year after year after year, after about 6 years, you destroy that land. And so they have rest periods between. And that's responsible. We've learned not to just go at it and go at it and go at it. We hold back and we have rest periods when it comes to the land. And if you don't, you will ruin the soil and you'll ruin the potential for future crops. If this is the way it is with the land that doesn't have a mind, will, and emotion and doesn't live, raising children, It's certainly the case with the womb of a woman. And the mental stability of parents raising children. Paul instructed married people, however, not to be apart from each other for very long, lest it leads to trouble. So what are we supposed to do? Paul says, stay together. Onan says, don't spill the seed. We're trying to be responsible. And we have all these factors, and yet religion comes in and says, you do it the right way, and you have child after child after child, because that's what God wants, right? And so these poor Catholic women and men really believe this is the way it should be. Running roughshod over the body and mind of a wife by impregnating her endlessly, one after another, until she hits menopause, which is a great word. Menopause, it's an invited word to a woman, I'm sure. I know it's menopause. Is that when the husband, what's the husband supposed to do when the wife is in menopause, if he's still fertile, if he's still sexually active? Is that spilling the seed too? What do they do during the time that she's menstruating as a healthy childbearing female? Are they supposed to not participate in that? And then are you not supposed to spill the seed? Are you supposed to get sexually aroused to the point where just before the seed comes out and then you pull back and stop? I mean, how many games are we going to play with ourselves, no pun intended, when it comes to figuring this stuff out? Time and place, folks. Time and place is everything. What we read in the Bible was for them then, as God was raising up a nation to bring forth the oracles and Messiah. Are we supposed to, let me just ask you, this makes sense of this. Do we practice Levirate marriage today? My brother died. He left kids, so it wouldn't be applicable. But if my brother died, are you telling me that I should have taken his wife too, to be my wife, and gone in under her so that she would have kids? So that there'd be more kids? Do we do that today? We don't do that today. And yet you want to say Onanism is still in place? And that was the setting for Onan pulling out in the first place? Of course we don't practice Levirate marriage. It was then and then. And most pastors would agree, but they pick and choose this stuff about birth control instead of admitting that stuff had application then, it doesn't now. The religions of the world want birth control forbidden because they want to create more children for themselves. The more people you have having babies who are devout to your church, the bigger your church is going to grow over a period of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And the Catholics knew it. The Mormons knew it. In fact, let me show you what happened in the Mormon church. In 1917, George F. Richards said this: "My wife has borne to me 15 children. Anything short of this would have been less than her duty and privilege." So Mormons are known for having large families, especially back in my day. You know why? Because of statements like that. Even though the Mormon church slowly changed things and softened it up, they initially started out that way because they wanted their members having tons of babies, because tons of babies make tons of members. Joseph Fielding Smith in 1916 said, "Those who attempt to pervert the ways of the Lord and to prevent their offspring from coming into the world," he's talking about birth control here, probably as well as abortion, "are guilty of one of the most heinous crimes in the category. There is no promise of eternal salvation and exaltation for such." So that's a heavy thing, you know. And I know they did not support birth control all the way up to probably David O. McKay, maybe a little bit later. The softer version in 1939 came out, and what they would do then is they would do what many pastors do, and they would say, you know, we're supposed to have children, and we're supposed to bring them in to this world, so birth control really isn't a good idea, but you have to use your own discretion, you know, but it's really not a good thing. However, that's the softer approach, and it's gotten better. In 1999, the Mormon church policy and the Church Handbook of Instructions came out and says this: "It is the privilege of married couples who are able to bear children to provide mortal bodies for the spirit children of God." whom they are then responsible to nurture and rear. See, that's the other thing the Mormons play, is that you have a bunch of spirit children up there waiting to be born. And when you practice birth control, you're stopping them from being able to gain their bodies so that they can go on and become exalted and become gods possibly. So that's why another reason why birth control is bad. There's spirit children waiting up there. A whole guilt trip. The decision as to how many children to have and when to have them, that's an important line, is extremely intimate and private and should be left between the couple and the Lord. Church members should not judge one another in this matter. That's the first time, 1999, the Mormon Church said, okay, we have been tromping around in areas that we shouldn't relative to what happens between a couple in their bedroom. We're going to back off on this. We're not going to try to tell you that having 15 children is your duty and your privilege, right? And so going back to the Reformation, the LDS Church isn't the only one who's thrown down. I want you to listen to what Martin Luther said from the Protestant side about birth control. This is a most disgraceful sin. Birth control. Withdrawal method, spilling the seed method, whatever method you're using, no. And that was back when they didn't have a bunch of birth control contraptions like we've got now. It is the most disgraceful sin. It is far more atrocious than incest and adultery. That's heavy. We call it unchastity, yes, a sodomitic sin. For Onan goes into her, that is, he lies with her and copulates, and when it comes to the point of insemination, spills the semen, lest the woman conceive. Surely at such a time, the order of nature established by God in procreation should be followed. Accordingly, it was a most disgraceful crime to produce semen and excite the woman and to frustrate her at that very moment. Oh, why do we let men get involved in these things? Why? I bet there's people who were probably like, yes, Martin Luther, yes, that's right. You are so wise of the Lord. That's the biggest bunch of baloney I've ever heard in my life. All this holy talk about these things, you know. There have been variations on Luther's stance, and they've gotten more and more watered down since Luther spoke, admittedly. But wasn't Luther one of the authors of Sola Scriptura? And this was his interpretation of the Scriptura. This is what he had to say about onanism. And even more quizzically, don't most Protestants today practice birth control? They do. So we have a disconnect. We have hypocrisy. We have one of the founding fathers of the Reformation who helped found Sola Scriptura say what he says about the withdrawal method in intercourse, and we have Protestants today, they don't give a rat's rear end. You know, and that's my point. No one gives a rat's rear end in the end anyway, unless people who are hyper-religious. And so why don't we just admit that and let people be responsible for their own choices? Why do we have to let men step in and try to guilt us or shame us or cause us to think this or that? Let the husband and wife who love the Lord decide. Yeah, we want to have another child. No, we really don't want to have another child right now. Just like a farmer decides, yeah, we want to raise a crop this year. No, we don't. And God respects that, right? So we have three general messed up views regarding birth control from the major religious presentations that have been trusted by billions as people speaking for God. The Catholics say birth control is wrong, 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 and they stick with that today. This produces too many children and mothers who are just wiped out because of that view around the world. I'm not talking maybe necessarily so much here in the U.S. anymore with our Italian immigrants and stuff and our Hispanic influences, but I'm talking about in third world countries. They are destroyed by that stance. The Mormons said it was wrong, and then they said it was wrong, but it was up to the couple, and now they say it's okay, producing convenient theology based on the demand of the people, and the Protestants were firmly against it at the onset of the Reformation by the mouth and minds of people like Luther, and yet the Protestants today don't really care, and they live in hypocrisy to how Protestantism was founded. So all of this is the product of religious men and women insisting that the scripture is applicable to us today in ways and not admitting that it has been fulfilled. We don't practice Levirate marriage. We don't worry about onanism. And so from the rhythm method, that's when you're trying to guess on, when she's ovulating, and that's when you don't have sex, to the pull-out method, which was what Onan did, and all the churches based theirs on that, to the condom, to the pill, to the patch, to the IUD, to all the other shots and different things people do, whatever else is out there. Birth control in the age of fulfillment, and it's a beautiful thing, is in the hands and the responsibility of the couple involved, with God guiding them by writing on their hearts and in their minds. And I trust that. That's a position of faith as a believer. No pastor should say to a couple, well, couples don't have to have children either. They can decide not to have children. They should be left alone. So you, made in God's image, are capable, with Him with you, writing and His Spirit speaking, to decide when to have children, when to prevent them. I mean, even God took a rest after 6 days, right? So think about these things. But this brings us to the biggest question about birth control, the most aggressive form of birth control, and that is abortion. And we're going to hit that next week. The topic of abortion in the Christian church today. So write your comments and questions below on the subject of birth control tonight. We'll cover them tomorrow night here on Heart of the Matter.